Thank you for all the talks. Amos Oz, the Israeli writer, once pointed out that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can end in two fashions: a Shakespearean tragedy and a Chekhovian tragedy. Okay, and as an Israeli and a Canadian, I much prefer the Chekhovian tragedy. So if you can tell us, anyone on the panel, how we can bring it to a Chekhovian tragedy, because it's clearly a tragedy for both people. We're both victims, we're both victimizers. It's high time we realize it, but how can we take it there?
Okay, we turn to the panel, and maybe there is a small opening afterwards again. Are there any?
I want to repeat Bob's question. What is the Jacobian tragedy?
In a Shakespearean tragedy, you're a bloody mess.
All the bodies are all on the ground.
All the bodies are all on the ground. Hamlet, Claudius, Kurt, everybody's dead. And, or Macbeth and company are dead, Duncan and company are dead, the children too. And the Chekhovian tragedy, people go away mad. Everybody's unhappy. They've lost something. And they have this idea, Galvania, for instance, that, this was a bust. We come together. By the way, typically in Chekhov, people come together at some sort of out-country place, and they quarrel and they fight and they repeat each other's resentments and self-pity, and they go away. Nothing is resolved. And there's a note in Chekhov that the Twitter of humor, that there's something fundamentally, attractively and pathetically human about this. And this is life. And this is what we live for. And we'll go on doing this, and it's not going to solve, and we don't have hope. But there's also a kind of leitmotif of hope undercurrent, that you're alive. Yeah, they're alive. No blood on the floor, no bombs in the ceiling, something like that.
Okay.
I love those remarks because I must say I think we are living in a Chekhovian tragedy. I think that is the situation today. Both peoples are alive. There's art, music, war, killing, unhappiness, but there is a kind of tragedy. And in this regard, in the Talmudic position, a sin in the Talmud is speeding up redemption. In Hebrew, it's referred to as chisheves haketz. It's God has his plan, and there's a danger for people to try to speed up redemption. God has a plan, and to speed up the redemption could only lead to more tragedy, more sin, and more difficulty. So in this sense, my call to cover is not to try to, though I love Brian Blunt's presentation enormously, I don't think we are at the point where we need, to use your wonderful outline, which I learned a tremendous amount, and get the sides together. I think that would be a Talmudic sin. It would be chisheves haketz. It would be hurrying the process. What we could do now is to live with this terrible tragedy and, forgive me, the killings as well. And what we in cover could do is give awareness, make things conscious, bring things out in the open, unveil the unconscious, the resentments, the trauma that Willie spoke about and that Father Schwager spoke about. We don't know enough about it. I think bringing this to consciousness, talking about it, would be a kind of collective therapy that we both sides understand. After enough time on the couch, living with this terrible tragedy, and I know it might sound pessimistic, I am sure that God in his love and wisdom will bring the Messiah, will bring redemption, but only in his time. We now have to do a human task. And our task is to make conscious, in using Girardian insights, the nature of it. And then, with hope, with faith, we will find the solution over time.
I want to address 4 points. One, to my friend here, who asked me about what does this In the discussions that we had on Northern Ireland, we first did it on what was the relationship of grassroots dialogue to political and social reconciliation. We had to answer the question of what's political and social reconciliation. And quite often there was what I thought was a more Catholic approach to the thing that says you do this, you do this, you have this, and in the end you get reconciliation. And that I disagreed with. And whether the other one was Protestant or just mine, I don't know. But it is one that, it's a process. It's a process that you begin at the very beginning, and it's a process that goes on. That if you have to wait till you get all of these other things, it's never going to happen. But it's a commitment at the very beginning, and it's a commitment that somehow arises that we belong together. Now, where that comes from, it's hard to say. I mean, I have certain kinds of sense that we belong together comes from deep religious beliefs and experiences that I have, and I think people bring different things. But I don't know how you can convince somebody prior to that conviction that you belong together. We belong together is the starting point of that, and they don't know how to underestimate the importance of that. Secondly, I wanted to address my friend right here who emphasized, and partly what Sandy said about forgiveness. You mentioned that it came from Hannah Arendt, and it does. And in that, it's a passage about what makes human community possible, and there's actually two poles that she mentions. Forgiveness is one, and promise is the other. And what I want to suggest is promise is much more important. And that it is a promise about how do you live in the future with one another that makes forgiveness possible. And I think that in the theological Christian sense about that stuff, we seem to forget that God's forgiveness to us is a promise. There's a promise made to us, and within that promise there is the ability for us to figure out how it is that we're going to forgive one another. But it's a different kind of nature of that, and that only times that I've ever found that people could forgive is when the future became less important, that the past wasn't being determined about what the future was going to become. In the case of the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa, the future direction of society was set. This is what it's going to be. And you can now go then back and deal with the past, because the past is the past. It's not the present, as Faulkner would have it say. Secondly, and thirdly, I thought that in some ways I tried to do that, which is the kind of notions of how do you get through this tragedy, and standing up is you make it day by day. You create whatever you exist with one another day by day. That it is to try to get through that thing, go home, but mad. My friend Avishai Margalit talks about platonic hate. So if we could get platonic hate in the Middle East, I'd be happy about that. So that I mean, you may not agree with the suggestions that I made, but it was an attempt to get it precisely at that point. The other is a general comment about the analysis of where to cover and how should it play a role. And I don't know, maybe it's the kind of things you say about that it isn't that kind of grand role. But the one advice I would say about that is don't do anything too hard. That quite often you get analysis and they're just too hard to do. And it's important to try to figure out what can be done, what simple thing can be done, and see if we can play that role, rather than undertaking grand things that are just too hard to accomplish.
Time is short, so there are two more comments or questions, I don't know, from the audience, and I will ask them to say what they have to say, and then I would ask you, the five of you, in the reverse order, to say something for a conclusion, and especially what would you think should be the next, should there be a next step taken by Kava, and what would you like to be the next step? A modest step, a small step, no step? Maybe if the five of you give a short answer to that, that helps us to come to a conclusion what we have to do. So the next is Dietmar, and then Andrew, and then the panel in the reversed order.